Hi, I'm Steven Stamp. I'm the editor for Inside Lacrosse's IL Indoor site, and I'm really enjoying the genesis of Inside the World of Box Lacrosse with Adam Levy and Greg Beecher here on Blue Squatch Productions. Thanks for being with us. Check out the link to the full show below. And after talking about Caleb Benedict, that takes us to section 4 of the show, where we're going to talk about the Georgia Swarm writ large. We've mentioned Jordan McIntosh today. We've mentioned Brian Cole in some of the other sections. Go to the Blue Squatch YouTube to check them out. Adam, what about the Swarm? Because they were in overtime with Buffalo last year in the playoffs. They were a goal away from dethroning the champions. They're right there, but in our IL Indoor preseason rankings, we have them not making the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I still had them as a playoff team. They haven't changed much, which to me was like lots of continuity. I know you and Cooper both had some questions about them. What is the concern that people have about Georgia?
Well, I think it's a concern even internally, especially after last year. And yes, they did step up in the playoffs, but I know talking to Coach Como and the rest of the staff that it was consistency. It was about they'd have a couple wins and they'd go on a couple losses and they just wouldn't be able to build momentum off of their success, which is kind of interesting. You don't expect maybe a Lyle Thompson and Shane Jackson team and a Brett Dobson team, especially those guys are so motivated and so driven to win, for that to happen. I think that, so much is going to rely on that defensive side of the ball and Brett Dobson being who Brett Dobson can be. His name continues to rise in terms of the field and the box ranks. So I'm excited to see what he can do. But yeah, when it's interesting, I'm a big stats guy, as everybody knows. And as you hear on the Lacrosse Matrix podcast is, last year you got a guy like Lyle Thompson who had, by his standards, an off year, 87 points. The team makes the playoffs though, and Andrew Q as well with 87 points. But the year prior, they had both had over 100 points, and yet the team didn't make the playoffs. So it's going to be that depth scoring, and you got guys like Seth Oakes. You mentioned a guy like Brian Cole contributing. So I think it's going to be an offense by committee and getting more guys involved. I'm very excited to see another year of progression from Adam Wiedemann because I think he's one of those top players in the league as well.
When we talked about this before, and we were talking about Lyle Thompson having kind of an off year, and I didn't have the stats pulled up. I said, didn't he get over 40 goals though? And he did. He had a 40-plus goal season again. An amazing year. And an interesting nugget, and you appreciate this as a stats guy. I love the stats. 2018, he was coming off an MVP season, had another what could be considered a down year in terms of scoring. I think he had 87 points again that year. But he led, and I wrote about this at the time quite a bit and talked about it because I couldn't believe it. He led the team in scoring, loose balls, and caused turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
That's unbelievable for a forward in the NLL. And he had, they didn't have a ton of guys with loss, but he's been, for around 15, 20 caused turnovers a bunch of times as well. He could play defense in this league and still be a very, very good player. You just don't give up the offense to do it. So he still plays forward, but Thompson's still a great player.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting you mentioned that because, if you look at the 2023 season, he had double-digit caused turnovers as well. It was down a little bit last year, but still 115 loose balls. He's really one of the best forwards to pick up loose balls, always has been. He's actually getting close to 100 caused turnovers. I'll have to ask our good friend Graham Perro to see how many guys who have exclusively been in that forward position have caused over 100 turnovers, because I'm sure it's not many.
Yeah. NLLstats.com is Graham's site, and you should be going there if you're curious about what is going on in terms of numbers. Graham Perro does so much great work. And we talked about, we're going to have a link to that as well. So you can just follow, just go down below and we'll get Graham Perro connected with you, because you should all be checking him out. I think, we talk about guys forward / defense. Brendan Bomberry, a guy who he played both in junior, mostly forward, but he played defense. He came up and started playing as a defender, transition player in Georgia. He's been a forward. He played transition for the Haudenosaunee Nationals at the Worlds because they had so many ready forwards who were so good. He can play either. He's listed as a forward, and they've got a lot of righty D transition, so he looks like he's kind of settled in at forward at this point. So is that his best position? I mean, he's good everywhere.
Oh yeah, he's definitely very good everywhere. Now it's going to be interesting to see, not Lyle, excuse me, Jeremy Thompson also decided to come back for another year. He'll be at the Face-Off X. He's obviously one of the greatest to ever do it at the Face-Off dot. Excuse me.
Thank you.
He's one of the greatest to ever do it at the dot. So it'll be interesting to see what he has. And is this his last year? Are they? Really, is he going to try and make a push and do this, because he's getting into his later 30s there. I was just trying to check here a guy like Jordan McIntosh as well. I know he had previously signed a 3-year deal. I was just trying to find if he is if his contract is up this year, or do you know, does he have another year after this? No, I'm
not sure, but I think the contract is obviously a factor, but I don't think it's particularly relevant for Jordan McIntosh. He's the captain of that team. He's still such a good player. Yeah. Really shifted his focus more to the defensive end, but I think he plays as long as he wants to, because I don't think they're going to be rushing Jordan McIntosh out the door. He'll talk to Eddie Comeau, the head coach, and obviously John Arlotta, the owner GM, and those guys, and I think they'll have those conversations about when it's time, but they're certainly not rushing him out. He's still playing at a very high level, probably his best defense over the last couple of seasons, I think, that he's ever played.
100%. And actually, I remember speaking to Jordan right after he had signed that 3-year deal, because I think even back then there was like, how long is he going to stay? What's going to happen? And I think the person who he really had to talk to, which is normally the case with players, was his wife, and how that was going to work out, him being away from home. So yeah, I think you're right. There's no reason why this team would ever want a guy like Jordan McIntosh not to be on their roster.
So we've got that they said, it's funny you mentioned the not being as consistent as they would like, that you win a couple, you lose a couple, which is kind of normal, right? That's what happens. There are 14 good teams in this league. You're not going to have easy nights. You're not going to go on runs. Maybe they were spoiled because the year before, they lost all those games coming out of the gate, and then they won 7 in a row down the stretch, like 8 of 9 to get into the playoffs in 2023. Maybe they just kind of had in the back of their head, we can win 7 in a row. That doesn't happen often. That's not normal.
It doesn't. No. And they started out 4-1, which was really good last year. But then it was the 3-game losing streak. Then they win 2. Then they lose 2. Then they win 2. Then there's a loss. And then it was, you could never get over 2 wins in a row again. And I think the best teams, especially when that happens as often as it did for Georgia, that's where you get snake bitten. But as you mentioned at the get-go, it's how you do in the playoffs. And every guy will tell you, once you're in the postseason, anything can happen. And Georgia did almost upset the Bandits.
One of the things when Georgia comes up, I love the stability. There's virtually no change. They're running it back. They've got Dobson and Thompson and Jackson and Q and McIntosh and PJ Comizio and Mike Manley and Kaysen Tarbell. We haven't even mentioned. He's so good. Right. So many good players. They're all back. I love the continuity. And you had an interesting point regarding them and the PCLC dispersal draft.
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting. I mean, like we talked about, or you has just mentioned, is that like with the dispersal draft and everyone making changes and signings, it really seems like nobody's been talking about Georgia. They're almost going under the radar because they're like, we know who we have. We're going to ride or die with these guys. And I think that, having that continuity, having that roster that you're familiar with and the camaraderie, I think it'll be interesting to see kind of a contrast to all these teams who have made such drastic changes. And we saw how some of that played out positively in week 1. And so it'll be interesting to see how Georgia can do that in week 2 in their first game.
Yeah, we've got to look up who they took in that draft now, because we did that before to go look it up. So who did Georgia take? So they traded 1 pick to Calgary when Calgary took Cam McLeod. And that's the pick, I believe, that they got Seth Van Scheppen with. So they got Seth Van Scheppen. So I like that. He's a good young player. Yep. And in the second round, they took Caleb Huber, who is another young player, a lefty, who hasn't made the roster yet. So it'll be interesting to see. But they haven't had any immediate impact players from the draft itself. But we should say, Seth Van Scheppen is basically a dispersal draft pick for them, and he is a pretty important piece of their future, I think.
Yeah, and also I'm sure I believe he's signed, or is he going to college for another year? Michael Grace, the number 3 overall
He's going back to school.
Okay, well then next year, that'll be a great piece, and we've talked over the years just quickly about how you got guys like Wiedemann, you got guys like TJ Comizio in front of Brett Dobson, bringing in a guy like Michael Grace, a young kid. I think that'll be really good to have that kind of core there.
And they also have a guy they picked a couple of years ago, Jacob Hickey, great young player, and he is at Western University, and just won a Begataway Cup with them as an All-Canadian with Kufla again, and he is great, but he is really focusing on his studies. Even though he's not south of the border, he could play while he's at Western, but he's chosen to really focus on school. But he graduates this year, he's done at Western. Does he come and play? I would think he would come and play with Georgia next year, and that's another big impact player. So they have, certainly next year, a lot of guys coming. There will be some changes, but for this year, not a lot of change. Will Georgia be a playoff team? We'll wait and see. There's some divisions. It's going to be fun to watch. And that will do it for this final segment of Inside the World of Box Lacrosse. For Adam Levy and Greg Beecher, I am Stephen Stamp. Thanks for being with us here on Blue Squatch Productions. Check out the IL Indoor app. Check out the links to the full show and all the segments below. And thanks for being with us. We will see you very soon.